PBC is all about and why or what are we trying to do here. So PBC is a research-based business advocacy body, as some of you probably know, and we primarily focus on policies to promote growth of the country through business. We are fortunate to be supported by nearly 100 of the largest and most successful businesses in Pakistan, and they're both local as well as multinational companies. Two of them are present here today, HBL and Unilever. Some time ago, we realized that aside from advocating what is good for the country and what is good for in terms of business policies, and what is it that we need to take to the government to improve the business environment, we also have a responsibility to share some of the good practices that led to the success of the people who belong to PBC, the 100 large organizations that I just mentioned. So this is how the Center of Excellence in Responsible Business, which otherwise we call SERV, came about. So SERV is a forum for sharing best practice in responsible business across both members and well beyond membership. And really our target market for SERV, if I may call that, is really the medium-sized businesses. So we work primarily on the inclusivity and sustainability agenda. Those are the primary agendas. There are a few others that we work on. So on inclusivity, as Raja mentioned, a few years ago, we made a start with gender diversity. In this, we were very fortunate to partner with IFC, which is represented today on the panel, and we work with them on family-friendly policies. We've also worked with HBR on anti-harassment measures, and we now wish to extend diversity into the other facets and of gainful employment, particularly of the disabled, which is going to be our focus and is the theme for today's webinar. So it is estimated that 15% of Pakistan's population is disabled in one way or another, though reliable statistics are not available, and most likely this figure excludes those suffering from mental health issues, which unfortunately has gone up as a result of COVID. So once there is a law requiring all organizations employing more than 100 people to have 2% of disabled people employed nationally and 5% in the case of Sindh, all contribute in due to the national exchequer. It is by no means clear if this is actually happening. More importantly than just to follow the law, I believe work needs to be done on removing the stigma that is attached to having disabled people working for you. So we are fortunate today to have a star-studded panel, and I can't wait but to hear from them. So I'll just hand you back to Raja, and let's take it from there. Thank you very much for being here.
Thank you so much, Atansa, for introducing the PBC and what we hope to accomplish from this webinar and all our future initiatives together with our strategic partners. I would now like to invite Azima Tanji, who is the co-founder of Connect Here, to offer us her overview on disability inclusion, what it looks like, and the kind of work that Connect Here has done, and for an exciting announcement for its September event. Azima, over to you.
Assalamu alaikum and a very good evening to everyone. First of all, I would like to thank the amazing team at Center for Excellence in Responsible Business at the Pakistan Business Council for taking up this initiative and organizing this inclusive talk regarding disability inclusion for Pakistani businesses. Also, all the representatives that joined us today, regardless of their backgrounds, job roles, and limitations, to change the landscape for inclusion of persons with disabilities in our neighborhoods, our businesses, and our country. Before I move on, I just want to quickly make sure that the interpreter screen is also available with my talk right now. Are we all set? Okay, so I think if I could be removed from the spotlight so we can ensure that the interpreter is available with the presentation. Brilliant. So normally I would say things off the book, but today I have these set of papers to ensure everything that's in our hearts and minds based on our experiences is perfectly articulated to each one of you out there. So please bear with me while I go through it. I am Azima Tanji, CEO co-founder of Connect Here, and most importantly, something I never forget to mention, I am a child of deaf adult. My parents are deaf and sign language is my mother tongue. The agenda of today's webinar is very, very close to my heart because I've lived and learned through the experiences of my parents of how it's like to be a person with disability in Pakistan. Before moving on, I would also like to acknowledge Ehsan Saab's points about why it is important to make our companies inclusive and accessible for the approximately 15% of population with disabilities and the current challenges we face in making that a possibility. When I look back a few years ago, a person with disability had very limited choices, especially for education and employment. It was because of that and seeing my own parents and my family members deal with it for decades that I, along with my co-founder Arham, began our journey at Connect Here. But early on, we understood that the vision we had for Pakistan could not be realized by ourselves and that we would need to partner with other companies, organizations that are equally passionate about making a difference at a national level. So we set out to work with everyone who was willing to hear us out about why people with disabilities should be included. In pursuit of that mission, we actually taught more than 2,000 people, 2,000 hearing individuals sign language, produced almost 2,000 infotainment videos in sign language, and worked with 80 plus companies as accessibility partners. We also organized the first deaf inclusive concert in Pakistan, which was actually completely accessible for the deaf community. We partnered with Strings and we showcased that even deaf people can enjoy music if we have sign language interpreters on stage, lights adjusted to the beat of the music, and the use of vibration. Honestly, it is one of my best memories of true inclusion because if you were there in the audience yourself, you could not have told who is deaf and who's not because everyone was just enjoying and dancing to the music together. Before I further move on, I would like to interact with our audience and just quickly ask if you could respond to me through the chat box, just a yes or no question. How many of us over here attending this session today are working for diversity and inclusion in our organizations and are responsible for disability inclusion overall? If you are, and if you could just respond to me on the chat box. Okay. Okay, so I think the chat box is disabled for the participants, but I'm glad for the panelists who responded to us. So I can see there's 79 participants over here, and I'm sure there are a lot of us who are actually working for persons with disability inclusion. And then we also have in our panel, as well as in our audience, individuals who are persons with disabilities themselves. This webinar is actually one of the examples of the kind of work we would like to do, the kind of work we foresee to bring together persons with disability as well as people who are working for persons with disability on one platform. Bringing all stakeholders together is very, very important for actionable change. That is something that both Serve and Connect Here is working towards. Thank you so much, Raja, for that. Moving on, another thing we have seen in the last 5 years is the growing use of accessible technology that has made involvement of persons with disabilities more prominent. We have seen an increased use of screen readers such as JAWS to ensure involvement of persons with visual impairment at workspaces, especially at call centers, where they outperform the duties of a call center representative. Just like that, Connectia launched the first one-tap virtual sign language interpretation application that allows deaf individuals to connect with sign language interpreters remotely and instantly with a single tap. Have a quick look on how it works.
Hello, how may I help you? Okay.
Thank you so much for calling Connect here. How may I help you? So he's here for an interview and I'm his interpreter for this interview.
Okay, sure. What's your name and how may I help you?
So my name is Mustafa and I'm here for a job interview.
Okay, Mustafa, but first we would require a few of your documents.
Could you please tell me what are the documents required?
And with the increased adoption of corporations to ensure availability of virtual sign language interpreters at their branches, retail stores, and offices, it is ensured that a deaf person can walk into any space without the hesitation of not being able to communicate. Also, in the West, we have seen the positive impact of the Americans with Disabilities Act, launched in 1990, that empowered persons with disabilities to improve their quality of life, demand for their rights, and have complete accessibility in all spaces so that they can perform as equal citizens of the country. Similarly, in Pakistan, we have been fortunate to see some of the major changes in the last few years in terms of legislations and policies. Some of the biggest successes includes the Sin Disability Act launched in 2018, followed by rules specially drafted in consultation with stakeholders with disabilities or working for persons with disabilities. This legislation pioneered expanded job quotas, mandating accessibility infrastructure in both public and private spaces, and becoming an all-encompassing framework for the rest of Pakistan in how to best ensure inclusion of persons with disabilities in all aspects of their lives. And then we also, of course, have State Bank of Pakistan's policy on financial inclusion for persons with disabilities, launched on 21st June 2021. It is actually considered to be one of the most progressive policies in the entire region that recognizes all areas of accessibilities required for inclusion, mentions use of accessible technology such as braille stationery, sign language interpretation through in-person virtual means, and also advises financial institutions to work towards financial literacy of persons with disabilities. This has also increased in rightful employment for persons with disabilities at banks, which gives them an opportunity to improve their better work for their better quality of life. In addition to that, we saw that the constant advocacy and implementation of inclusive projects further helped encourage and enable persons with disabilities themselves to independently advocate for their rights. They're not only making their voices heard, but they're also partnering with supporting organizations to further expand the scope and magnitude of their movement. Such examples include the passing of modification in Motor Vehicle Bill in Sindh Assembly in 2019 that now allows deaf and hard of hearing individuals in the province the right to apply for driving licenses, through which they have been able to become a part of the ride-hailing industry and earn a living by becoming riders, or for even deaf and hard of hearing students to use that path to get part-time employment opportunities. We also have the wonderful story of Safira Bibi, who is an ambassador and advocate and a person with visual impairment herself. Safira struggled with not having the right to appear for her own examinations and also always relying on finding writers who could write and appear in examinations on her behalf. Um, during her studies at Karachi University, she was the one who constantly fought for her right and was finally able to bring a change for all students with visual impairment as they were given a chance finally to independently appear for exams using technology. All of that done by this lady. All in all, we see persons with disabilities understanding and realizing their rights with the motto of nothing about us without us. That has shifted the dialogue in the country and made it important for their voices to be heard, something that we very prominently work on as well. Now, most importantly, we have also been grateful to see a great shift in the behavior of corporations with multiple programs being initiated for hiring and including persons with disabilities in workplaces. We are grateful of our accessibility partners who have been regularly and constantly delivering to this cause, many of which are actually attending today's webinar. 5 years ago, we used to reach out to corporations to involve persons with disabilities in workspaces. And now we see them reaching out to us. That is truly a difference to be highlighted. Although, as much as we are glad to see all of this change happening in our country so promptly, so quickly, it is even more important to make these efforts mainstream and bring all the stakeholders together to discuss the challenges we are facing, whether it be not having actual data regarding persons with disabilities, access to education, employment, and skill-based training, or the efforts required to ensure that the community has the right amount of exposure to be a valuable part of corporate Pakistan. Indeed, all of this would be made possible once we have increased our collective efforts towards inclusion of persons with disabilities in all of our current projects, making it a priority to have a disability lens on, our disability lens on, and collaborate with one another to multiply our efforts and our overall impact. We truly appreciate SERB and PBC for focusing on expanding its ambit of disability inclusion. With SERB as our knowledge partners, Connect Here is conducting a landscape analysis to recognize all the efforts already made by corporations, organizations, institutions for disability inclusion and highlight what more can be done in the years to come to ensure this is a sustainable, ongoing effort to include the 15% of our population as part of our economy and improve their quality of life for their generations to come. For this analysis, we would like to invite all the companies to fill out a survey form and help us gather information regarding the efforts that have already been made. This report, Landscape Analysis of Disability Inclusion in Corporate Pakistan, the survey form, you can see it on your screen. There is a QR code. You can open this form, please fill it out, share information with us so that we could create and establish report with our knowledge partners at SERB. This report will then be launched on 16th September 2022 at Accessibility Awards, an inclusive corporate event organized by Connect Here to continue this discussion of corporate inclusion and provide a space for companies to interact with persons with disabilities, learn from their experiences, and take part in recognizing them for their efforts. Therefore, we would also, with our corporate partners, will be awarding prominent leaders with disabilities who have been involved in making sustainable impact and change. Not only that, Connect Here is actually very, very excited to also be organizing a deaf inclusive concert in December to showcase yet again how any space can be made accessible with the right efforts and the right mindset and the right intentions and partnerships with all of us. We invite you all to join hands with us in our efforts towards a disability inclusive Pakistan. If you'd like to get in touch with us or become a part of our upcoming inclusive events, feel free to reach out to me on the given email address on your screens. Lastly, I would like to thank you all for taking out time to learn and expand our visions together. Special thanks to our wonderful sign language interpreters, Minerva and Riaz, for always making sure our deaf participants have equal access to information and opportunities. Take care. Thank you so much, and Allah Hafiz.
Thank you, Azima, for your excellent presentation. We're very excited to work on the landscape analysis. We strongly encourage all PBC members to please register to complete the survey through the link that was provided. If you have any questions, please reach out to me or Isra, who is also from Connect Here. Our email addresses will be available through the survey form. And we hope to get a great response so we can truly understand the current landscape of disability inclusion. Before I continue, we are going to switch interpreters. So thank you so much, Minerva, for your time. And Riaz Ahmed will now take over. So if you could give us a minute. And now I would like to invite Radaba Nasser, who is the global lead on economic inclusion, for a global perspective on disability inclusion that is currently, the trends that exist currently. Rudaba, if I will share your presentation and then we should begin.
Great, thank you so much. Assalamu alaikum, everyone. I'm Rudaba Nasser, and as Rajat mentioned, I lead IFC's global work on economic inclusion, focused on persons with disabilities and LGBTI people. Some of you might remember me from my work on care. I also lead another program at IFC on care, covering childcare, elderly care, and mental health care. I'm a brown-skinned Pakistani woman with long dark hair tied back. Today, I'm wearing a dark blue dress with white flowers on it. And today I will give you an overview of IFC's report and research on disability inclusion, starting with defining disability, sharing some market trends, business case, and emerging practices. To learn more, you may visit our website, ifc.org/disability. Next slide, please. And the next slide. So how do we define disability? We go by the UN Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, or the CRPD definition, which implies that disability is the result of the interaction between a person and their environment. Persons with disabilities include those who have long-term physical, mental, intellectual, or sensory impairments, which in interaction with various barriers may hinder their full and effective participation in society on an equal basis. And this includes persons living with disabilities that are invisible, such as cognitive impairments, learning difficulties, chronic pain. And we also acknowledge that in many parts of the world, people are aging into disability status, and conflicts and crises such as climate change and COVID are also contributing factors. Next slide, please. Now, with that conceptual framework in mind, let's look at some global disability market trends. The size and potential of the largely untapped disability banking market is significant and is growing in importance. Persons with disabilities represent around 16% of the global population, or around 1 to 1.85 billion people around the world. And according to the Return on Disability Group, this figure increases to 3.4 billion people when we consider the family members, friends, and caregivers of persons with disabilities who make purchasing decisions with that in mind. And together, they control over $13 trillion in annual disposable income. Yet, persons with disabilities face physical and institutional barriers which impede their access to jobs, to education, training, products and services, including financial and banking services. Next slide, please. So what is exactly the cost of that exclusion? As I mentioned, even though persons with disabilities make up about 15% of the global population, and 1 in 6 people in Asia Pacific live with a disability, yet the cost of exclusion represents up to 7% of GDP in some Asia Pacific countries. Also, 80% of studies found a positive, significant association between disability and economic poverty, as well as unemployment. And 80% of persons with disabilities live in developing countries, often in conflict-affected countries, post-conflict countries. And only 4% of businesses are focused on making offerings more inclusive of persons with disabilities. Poor credit access hampers the growth potential of entrepreneurs with disabilities. For example, in Pakistan, only 8% of persons with disabilities have access to financial services. And data from Fiji and Pakistan reflect a low share of self-employed persons with disabilities as well. And that is even worse for women with disabilities, because they often experience even more inequalities when it comes to access to credit, jobs, employment, and opportunities. And here are some more data points in terms of what is the cost of exclusion. In Bangladesh, for example, estimates indicate that exclusion of people with disabilities from the labor market results in a loss of US $891 million a year. And income losses among adult caregivers adds an additional loss of $234 million a year. On the education side, we also see that, for example, in Nepal, the inclusion of people with sensory or physical impairments in schools was estimated to generate wage returns of 20%. So if we expand education and employment opportunities, that actually has an impact on the economic growth of countries. Next slide. So what we did is that we wanted to better understand what are the range of inclusive banking practices, or just generally corporate practices that could be implemented to support employees and customers with disabilities. So we started with the banking sector, and we surveyed about 15 of IFC's treasury underwriter global banks and financial institutions, and we asked them to share information about various inclusive policies, practices, products, and services they're offering. And you can see the 12 banks who responded to the survey, their logos are there on the screen. We also supplemented this information with desk research on the practices of regional banks in emerging markets, including Argentina, Colombia, Pakistan, and you will see that peppered throughout the report. Next slide. So all 12 banks surveyed recognized that there's a strong business case for disability inclusion in terms of recruiting, retaining, and attracting the best talent at all levels, expanding markets through new products and services, strengthening compliance and risk mitigation, and attracting and enhancing the performance of investments. And we also found a study of companies in Brazil, Germany, India, Japan, UK, and the US, which shows that the share of employees who report having an idea that would drive value for their company is higher, 75% among professionals with disabilities compared to their non-disabled colleagues, 66%. Next slide, please. So the emerging inclusive practices that we found through our research can be split into these 6 areas of action. Now, while these are shared by global banks like HSBC and Standard Chartered and Citi, we believe companies across sectors and regions can apply these practices right now. And we call these emerging practices instead of good or best practices because more data and impact evaluations are required over a longer period of time to make those conclusions. And I invite companies on the call today to implement these practices and then collect data on impact so that you can show other companies that this really works and inspire them to take action as well. So the 6 categories are increasing the share of persons with disabilities in the workforce, creating inclusive leadership teams and workplaces, driving the disability and inclusion agenda in banking and other sectors, offering products and services that respond to the needs of persons with disabilities, implementing commitments to disability inclusion in investment and procurement practices, and then lastly, creating partnerships, community support, and outreach. Next slide, please. So increasing the share of persons with disabilities in the workforce requires a multifaceted approach, including targeted company recruitment programs, HR training, internships, inclusive job ads, and partnerships with specialized agencies to reach candidates with disabilities. For example, Deutsche Bank in Singapore has been prioritizing hiring persons with disabilities, and through its Disability Inclusion Committee, DB Enable, they plan disability inclusive events, mentoring programs, engagement sessions with external organizations. And here it is important to tackle occupational segregation and underemployment. Persons with disabilities should be offered meaningful, better, and paid jobs that meet their qualifications. Next slide, please. And now, while diversity is important, equity and inclusion are equally key. It is therefore essential to create an inclusive work environment in which all employees, including those with disabilities, feel valued, safe, feel like they belong, and feel like they're free from discrimination and harassment. And all of this can lead to better retention and productivity. And this can be engineered and supported by a strong tone at the top, combined with corporate policies, employee resource groups, workplace accommodations, family-friendly benefits, leadership training and mentoring, awareness-raising campaigns, and staff sensitization, all ways in which banks like Deutsche Bank and others are taking action across their global offices. Next slide, please. Public accountability and transparency are vital to advancing the disability inclusion agenda, and most banks surveyed submit themselves to independent assessments and benchmarking against external disability inclusion standards. Participating in these benchmarking initiatives also allows banks to identify gaps and then continuously improve their inclusion efforts and raise the bar for the sector and other companies as a whole. So, for example, ANZ, Bank of America, Barclays, Citi, Deutsche Bank, HSBC, Standard Chartered, all banks that we work with are signatories of the Valuable 500, which is a global gathering of 500 CEOs committed to disability inclusion. And I wanted to share an example from Pakistan as well. The Standard Chartered launched a project for the economic empowerment of youth with disabilities in Pakistan, the Future Makers Inclusive Employability Project. Next slide, please. So recognizing the size and potential of the disability inclusive market, many leading international banks invest in ensuring the physical accessibility of branches and ATMs, adding accessibility features to disability digital platforms, making customer service available to customers with disabilities, and collecting feedback to improve products and services. For example, Santander in Argentina has developed an app to encourage communication with people who face difficulties when using banking services. And Azima already mentioned the progressive policy implemented by the State Bank of Pakistan. Next slide. Several banks have also taken steps to align their investment and procurement practices with their broader commitments on disability inclusion, including through social bonds, supplier diversity initiatives. For example, TD Bank, our partner, prioritizes suppliers that are at least 51% owned and operated by individuals with disabilities. And lastly, next slide, please. Partnerships with disability inclusion organizations, community groups allow banks and other companies to demonstrate long-term commitment to disability inclusion and gain greater insights into the challenges faced by persons with disabilities, providing an additional pathway to influence positive change. For example, the Kenya Bankers Association works with several banks, including Standard Chartered and local nonprofit Enable, to tackle accessibility challenges. So this is the time to support those local nonprofits, support companies like Connect Here, and partner with them to expand disability inclusion. And I would just like to now leave you with a call to action. Next slide, please. What can banks, financial institutions, and other companies across sectors and regions really do? I invite you to think about strengthening access to leadership roles for persons with disabilities, recruit, retain, develop more employees with disabilities, improve data collection, as I mentioned, track progress of your initiatives to strengthen the business case for disability inclusion in Pakistan, ensure accessibility, inclusive product development and service delivery for customers with disabilities, and lastly, increase the focus on persons with disabilities in your investment strategies. I want to end by congratulating SERB and all the companies, NGOs, organizations on the call today for their renewed efforts and focus to advance disability inclusion in Pakistan. We stand by you. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Ridhama, for that fantastic, insightful presentation. And I feel a renewed surge to work in disability inclusion, even though I know that this is literally what I'm supposed to be doing as a part of my job. But this has been very inspiring. Thank you so much. So the next thing is the panel discussion, which is the main event for why we're here. I just want to make sure that the interpreter and the panelists were all visible at the same time. So if you could tell me in the chat if people are visible, Nazima, if you could help me out in this regard to make sure. So let me see. I'm going to remove the spotlight from the interpreter to make sure that all panelists are visible. Is everything okay? Is Riaz visible, the panelists, everyone? Okay, I'm getting some responses in the chat.
Raja, can you try spotlighting all the people who are going to be speaking and presenting?
Okay.
You can spotlight up to 9 people, yeah.
Perfect. How does that look?
Looks perfect. 8 people on screen on webinar.
Okay, perfect. So let me start with Muniba first. So Muniba, since you are part of now PDP, we want you to help us set the backdrop for disability inclusion. So Pakistan has a significant population living with some kind of disability, with the majority of them facing difficulty in joining the formal workforce. What can you say about the extent of regulatory support? What kind of support can we see from authorities on the government level, regulators, that can seriously affect this issue and determine the level of support that people with disabilities receive or don't receive?
Amikum, thank you for having me over and giving us this opportunity at Now PDP to put our perspective forward. In terms of how persons with disability are being treated as far as economic engagement through employment is concerned, and as far as regulatory bodies and their role is concerned. So the surprising thing as far as Pakistan is concerned, the law is there. And the law is it's quite detailed, and it takes into account quite a bit of infrastructural accommodations that are needed. It takes into account the kind of initiatives that need to be taken as far as employment and engagement through those avenues are concerned. However, what does lack as far as the Pakistani job market, or as far as the Pakistani market is concerned, is an implementation body that holds organizations and that holds institutions accountable. So if we pick out any category of institutions, be they educational institutions, be it the banking sector, be it the pharmaceutical sector, be it the textile sector, what you would observe is that there is a set of law that kind of mandates each entity that functions within that sector to ensure inclusion of persons with disability. However, when we go out on the ground, what we see is because there's a lack of reinforcement, because there's a lack of accountability in terms of the organizations reporting to a central body of whether they are compliant to the law that exists, which was mentioned earlier by, I think, Esansa, who said that based on the province that you're functioning in, your institution is in, the percentage kind of varies, the ratio or the quota allocated varies. However, there still happens to be one in each province. So it has been a huge success as far as the banking sector is concerned. I would like to say where the State Bank of Pakistan stepped up and took this initiative of introducing their policy for persons with disability and introduced clear targets for the inclusion of persons with disability in the banking infrastructure, not just only as a consumer, but also as an employee. We see banks stepping up, and we see banks moving towards ensuring disability and inclusion. However, this does not hold true for all other sectors where there is an absence of a body, or where there seems to be an absence of government's initiative in trying to keep a track of things in terms of compliance. What we can all do is we can voice this together. We can connect on one platform, come together as a consortium, and take this dilemma forward. Sindh happens to be one of the most progressive provinces according to how we've been observing things, and the law and the body in Sindh and the work that has been done in Sindh in terms of persons with disability and inclusion and their engagement, economic empowerment is commendable. But again, at the same time, whatever work is being done in terms of working towards the cause of inclusion, it's just like a needle in a haystack kind of a situation where a lot more needs to be done, where a lot more needs to happen. And it can only be done if organizations, if like-minded organizations come together, join hands, and they become the voice of persons with disability across Pakistan.
Thank you so much, Maniba, and it's fantastic to hear about the efforts made by the banking sector, which makes it very easy for me to move to the next question in this panel discussion. So we have Mr. Jamal Nasser, Chief HR Officer at HBL. So could you tell us, Jamal, HBL has over 1,700 branches across Pakistan, and for a portion of them, your organization has conducted what is called an accessibility review. Could you provide us with a bit of an overview of that process?
Okay, thank you. Assalamu alaikum, and firstly, thank you very much for the invite. pleasure to be here to learn from others and also try and share some of the small steps we've been trying to take. Look, firstly, when we go through the process, I think firstly what was important for us is to engage professional organizations. So, for example, we did one of the first organizations we talked to was now PDP. We continue to work with them and a number of other organizations as well in various phases and spheres of what we're trying, the agenda that we're trying to push. Look, and I think what was important was for us to get a understanding and realization that it's not just about setting up ramps in our branches. So that notion had to be changed, and the idea had to be changed. So what we did was we did that survey, get people to understand that with people who have this in wheelchairs and have disabilities in mobility will require ramps, will require wider doorways, will require restrooms with certain modifications. If there are individuals with visual disabilities, then you will need tactile flooring, you will need talking ATMs, and braille documentation and forms, etc. So I think going through that process, it was important for people to get an understanding that it's really beyond ramps. And so we're learning as we go. We've created 35 model branches across our network, where we have all facets of being able to put the modifications into our branches and facilities to help people with disabilities. But that said, as you said, we have 1,700 branches across, close to 1,700 stores across Pakistan. More than 1,200 have ramps to get people into the branches and through the ATMs. We have more than 400 talking ATMs. We have tactile flooring in all the 35 model branches that we have. We have braille stationery across Pakistan and make that available for our customers. And really, even our off-site ATMs, which are away from our branches and in different locations, we've set up ramps for people to be able to access that as well. So as I said, it's a learning process. We're continuing with that. And really, I think we're making good progress. We've been working at this for the last 2 or 3 years. So obviously, State Bank did come up with guidelines and regulations as well. That was last year. We'd started this journey before, and so it takes a little bit of learning, but you have to get specialized help from institutions that operate in Pakistan.
Thank you, Jamal. And it brings us to a very important point about inclusion, which is where when the management is aligned on this mandate, then it's a lot easier to start without having it, even when regulations are not in place, because the organization itself understands, what is the next step in. Then that brings me, Anna, to a question that I have for you as a part of Unilever, as their HR business partner. So management needs to adapt its communication style so that its vision and values for a more inclusive workspace are definitely communicated properly to the employees, to the rest of management, and have the entire organization aligned that way. So could you tell us more about that? What were the gaps that Unilever identify? What kind of solutions were proposed?
So first thing first, thank you so much for having me over, within the illustrious cohort. So yes, my role is GTM and an added responsibility is EDI lead. So let's understand, it's a very important question that you asked, and let's understand why would an organization like Unilever even set out on a journey like this? It actually, it is rooted in our purpose and in our why, which is Unilever for Pakistan. And essentially one of its manifestations is that we want the population of Pakistan across all cuts to be mirrored in our workforce. Yeah, so I think that is the first or the top level of communication that's that's set by the top person in the organization down to everybody. So I think that is, where it starts. I would echo with what Jamal Sahab said, that when you set out on this journey, it's very, very important to understand the outreach and to understand sourcing from the right, avenues, and perhaps, digressing from the conventional streams. And it then becomes important to partner with an organization like now PDP. That is what, we have partnered with, to help us, with the sourcing process, with the recruitment process, with the sensitization process and onboarding process as well. So I think that, is also important. It is also very important to understand that many people with disabilities may have experienced exclusion way earlier into their kind of lives, depending on how severe the disability is, right? So they might be excluded from education opportunities, from higher education, so way before they started kind of seeking job. And I think that is a kind of realization we had only when we, set out on this journey. And I think we are cognizant of the fact, and we take it on chin, that we are not completely equipped to, kind of ace, the uplift training program that we have. We are learning as we go along. And, I usually say that we are kind of growing wings as we fall. So we started off with, a small cohort of 6 people, hired them for their ambition, for their will, and for their grit, and learned in the process, and learned how are we going to uplift our, infrastructure, what kind of sensitization is required at the LM level and at the team level. What kind of projects are we going to kind of assign them, in which they are not just performing, but thriving. And yes, we are still not there in terms of kind of giving them middle management and senior management roles, but we have to, permanent employees in main functions like a finance and a CD, which is a sales function essentially. So, this is, pretty much what we have done at Unilever. By the end of the year, we want to take that number to 25. And we have the same plan in board. We actually are working very closely with now PDP to make sure that the sensitization process continues, and to make sure that the pool that we bring in, we're just not kind of, taking numbers. That kind of challenge is also there, because unless you don't give yourself that hard target of, we're going to do 25 in a year, or 30 in a year, it becomes a bit of a chicken and egg situation where you're thinking, okay, are we ready? Is the organization readiness there? And then we'll bring in, versus, we bring in and we kind of, as I say, grow wings as we fall. So I think that is the methodology, or the approach, so to speak, that Unilever has taken.
Thank you so much, Anna. There's definitely, I'm hearing a lot about a process where, you start someplace and then see where you need to progress, and to connect with the right parties that can assist you in this. So I had my next question for Deha, but I think she's having some internet issues. So let me continue then to Ridaba. So Ridaba, according to the report on inclusive banking, there is a significant population of people who are living with disabilities, and there's a lack of attention in that arena, which is leading to economic disempowerment. How is this urgency reflected globally? It is a very urgent issue, and it is not just in Pakistan. But specifically, I want to understand, if there is this urgency in the global arena, how can Pakistan emulate some of the efforts that are being made?
Sure. Thank you, Raja. So as we discussed in the presentation, the disability market is significant, even bigger than China, and it's growing. And with family and caretakers, persons with disabilities control over $13 trillion in annual disposable income. And given the size and the impact of this market, the global community, I see governments, development organizations, donors like DFAT, USAID, and now the private sector around the world in companies that we work with. IFC invests and works with 2,000 plus companies around the world. We see more and more are realizing the tremendous potential of disability inclusion. And certain regions, of course, have made more progress and strides in this area, like Europe and North America, Asia, and the Pacific, given the aging population in Latin America, but the business case for disability inclusion is clear and applies to the world. Different studies have established this business case on 3 levels: the economic, the business, and the individual performance. On economic performance, it means that more disability inclusive societies are better, have more economic growth. And on the business performance side, there's a survey by KPMG that 96% of CEOs said their responses to the pandemic shifted their focus to the social components of ESG, which means that enabling future-proofing of infrastructure and creating more usable human-centered products and services. And it just opens up a new market to tap into. On an individual level, greater diversity drives innovation, and employees that feel included are more motivated and perform better. I also mentioned the valuable 500. 500 CEOs have come together. It's the biggest CEO collective of the world. They have come together to commit to disability inclusion. And their study has found that disability inclusive business strategy promises a significant return on investment, 28% higher revenue, double net income, 30% higher profit margins, and strong next generation talent acquisition and retention. So there are all these amazing data points out there, companies taking action, organizations taking action. This is the right time to really dive into this. We see Nike and McDonald's and Walgreens and all these big companies around the world making products and services that are targeted, and then their marketing strategies also are targeted and inclusive of persons with disabilities. So these are some of the ways in which companies are taking action. Pakistani companies can take action. And the last point I want to mention is on assistive technology, which is yet another amazing frontier that we can cross together. Assistive technology, AT, is the application of organized knowledge and skills related to assistive products, systems, services designed to maintain or improve an individual's functioning and independence, and thereby promote their well-being. And currently only 10% of people globally who need AT have access to it. So we can, as a community, expand investment in AT, and this can really bring us 9-to-1 gains on access to, access to value for communities and economies as a whole. So I would just like to, bring everyone's attention to look into AT as well.
In that case, Rudabha, then my next question on Muniba becomes a lot easier. Since there are so many avenues for corporations for greater disability inclusion, has there been a business impact for the extent that there has been efforts made in this area? I'm sure there's a business case for inclusion, as we've heard from all of our speakers and through the presentation. So if you could walk us through some of that, that would be fantastic. You're on mute, Muniba. Unmute yourself.
Yeah,
Perfect.
so thank you for asking this very important central question. And I think this is more about impact and how the wave of change that is coming through this through the initiatives that are being taken by several organizations is creating this ripple effect that we're observing. It's been an interesting journey, and I think I would have to because Jamal Nasser Saab's here, and I can mention here that HPL was one of the very first banks to work on the cause of inclusion as far back as some 4 to 5 years ago, if I'm not wrong, somewhere around 2017 and 18, we started a project with HPL. And again, the purpose was to understand the overall environment and to kind of do a litmus test and see how ready the bank was in terms of disability and inclusion. And the idea should be about sustainable inclusion, right? So when we started working with the banking sector, and our lead at that point in time was HPL, and they were the ones who gave us, as now PDP, the platform to explore along with them and figure out avenues where inclusion can happen, where we can create jobs for persons with disability. We learned that it's a slower process. It's not a miraculous process where one day you have a setup which would become inclusive out of the blues. Like Jamal Sahab was saying, it requires a lot of learning, unlearning, and relearning on the part of the institutions and also on the part of organizations like us, because we are also learning alongside these entities, because somehow what we don't factor into account when we're understanding things from a Western perspective or from the perspective of a foreign country, how our local environment is going to adapt and react to what we are offering in terms of the change that needs to be made. So one of the learnings at Now PDP that we've had is that impact is going to come. It's going to come in smaller waves. You have to ensure that the groundwork is done and that organizations are ready to absorb and work alongside persons with disability. It requires a lot of moving out of your comfort zone. The kind of work that is required, the kind of effort that is still needed in terms of ensuring that that we create a holistically inclusive society. Well, there are miles to go before all of us sleep on that one, but it's great to see that the movement has started, that people have started committing to it. So from smaller numbers, I remember when we did the first cycle with HBL, we did a wonderful job in terms of assessing the branches, in terms of ensuring that we have created accessibility through ramps, through grab rails, through ensuring that there are restrooms in the bank where we can take in a wheelchair, where a person on a wheelchair can, use the restrooms at their comfort level. However, what the first cycle taught us was that we were not very successful in terms of employability. And that for us as Now PDP especially has been our end goal, where we have been trying to focus on creating employability. So the whole effort that we as an institution are putting in, and that we would encourage everybody, all of our partners to put in, is creating an environment which gives a person with disability the chance to grow within that environment, right? Like Radaba was explaining to us during her presentation, that it is the attitude and it is the environment that actually impacts in a everyday tasks in a setup that we provide him or her. So in the second cycle, in the second wave, in the second round that we did with the banks, with the corporate sector, we are doing this project which Anna mentioned with persons with disabilities at Unilevers. We started off small. We started off doing the groundwork more. So a lot of homework went in, where the supervisors would be interacting with the persons with disability, were sensitized, were kind of prepped into being ready for the effort that would go in with creating an environment that's conducive for a person with disability to engage with. And in that case, we're seeing results. We're seeing very successful results. Textile sector is another sector where we've been very successful, alhamdulillah. We work with some big textile giants. FMCG there's Unilever, then the banking sector, there's HBL, there's JS Bank. There's a number of institutions that are joining in, and the more the merrier, because it's going to create the force that all of us need to ensure that the right sort of inclusion happens, and it needs to be sustainable. I remember the days when we as Now PDP did this project with Karachi Electric, or K Electric, and we started off with a small cohort of 16 people, where K Electric wanted to really go big on employing them. These were persons with visual disability, and they were hired, and in a month we had them dropping out like anything. We had a lot of dropouts from the market, and K Electric came back to us, and the resources employed also came back to us with one thing. They said, oh, but we want to work. We were called in by this giant, and we thought it's going to be work that we'll be doing, but we go sit there all day. And then it was a learning process for all of us involved, that it cannot be engagement for the purpose of engagement. It cannot be a checklist on which you and I are signing off and saying, oh, I have 10 persons with disabilities. Now engaged and employed, I have 20 persons with disability, or I meet the quota. The idea is to really instate them and embed them within the system. So we went back to the drawing board, electric, we reassessed whatever was happening. We worked on the call center trainings, and K Electric was, again, I would like to say, one of the first organizations that started this setup with visual disability, where we used JAWS as a tool to ensure that the call center functionalities were not disturbed. And we still are very successfully working with the institution, which is the reason why I'm very glad to share that example, where something that we started off as an initiative came very close to becoming a failure for us, because at that point in time, we also maybe did not understand the granularities of how this whole process kind of works. But we have come in a long way from those days back in the early 2014s and 16s to today, where when we request organizations, I'd rather say when Azima was mentioning, that instead of us reaching out to organizations and working on and asking them to employ persons with disability and making a case for our trainees and beneficiaries, institutions are reaching out to us and asking us to facilitate them with persons with disability, engaging them with, connecting them with persons with disability, and ensuring that an overall environment is created and an attitudinal change and a behavioral change comes in. Because without the change in attitude, without
Yeah, thank you so much for that. I'm just conscious of time. And I'm very curious to see, because there's been so much progress over the past few years, even if it has been slow and there's been a lot of learnings, I would like to ask Zehra a question. Zehra, you have
Insight. I used to work at a bank for 33 years and just recently got retired. Thank you for inviting me to this panel among the distinguished guests. The question you asked is indeed a good one. If I compare my beginning 5 years at the organization with the last 5 years, I have seen not a small, when I first joined, I was the only deaf person on my floor, and people around me weren't aware of our culture and also did not know sign language. It was difficult for me to communicate with my peers. We used to talk by writing on a piece of paper. Honestly, they were very, very supportive towards me. I remember I had a boss and we had this sign for, we used to have floppy disk at that time. So we had a sign that we used to use to communicate. But I still felt that I would like to become a more regular part of the conversations happening around me. I then found a colleague who was interested in learning sign language and then became my source of communication as she would interpret for me. That made my life easier. But soon she got promotion as well and she moved to a different department, which again left me with a communication barrier with the rest of my colleagues, and the struggle continued. The other challenge that I faced, I was often invited to training programs and various events with the rest of my colleagues. I also used to attend these sessions, But unfortunately, there used to be no sign language interpreter available, which is why I would just ideally sit all day. I could never understand what they were teaching and never grow in my career as well because of that. I could have truly benefited out of it. Also, I did not even know that I could actually request for sign language interpreters, as I never realized that it's something that could be asked for. Lastly, I remember at that time, although I was a banker, I could not get my ATM card activated. I went to the branch and requested the manager for activation, but they said that you need to get it activated through phone call. I told him I'm deaf and I can't hear. How could I talk on phone call? After a lot of struggle, I was able to get my debit card, but it shocked me that do people think deaf people can't operate bank accounts or what? But just putting everything aside, honestly, my last 5 years at the organization have been remarkable. My company truly supported me, and I'm very, very grateful for that. I actually felt that no worries if I didn't have the support in the beginning, but thankfully, I had the support in the ending, and also that would help the generations to come. So, talking about some of the changes, there were people around me now in my last 5 years who understood the deaf culture, who understood what sign language is. They would learn sign language online. They would take classes from these new organizations, teaching classes, and they would come and talk to me in sign language, and that would always excite me. And also, another experience I would never forget. I was actually called to another event in the last years, and I once again went over there. For the first time, I saw that the event had sign language interpreter. I literally had goosebumps. Finally, I was actually able to understand what was being talked about in the session, in the event. I literally regretted, I wish I could have gotten this support earlier in my journey as well. I could have grew in my career, but that's okay. I see the upcoming generation of deaf youth getting this opportunity. And also I've seen a huge differences in the branches as well. After the state bank regulation, I've truly seen that in branches, people are learning how to talk to deaf community members. They have application where they virtually connect with sign language interpreters. And now they realize that even deaf people can get access to financial inclusion. Honestly, I want and I hope that this continues. This should not stop. The work that's being done for inclusion of persons with disability should continue. I do realize that when I started my journey back in 1990s, I probably didn't have the same kind of support. But at the end, I did see the change happening. There are apps now, technology there, online interpreters. So I see that the upcoming generation truly benefiting out of it. So if you guys want to learn more about how to make your spaces accessible for the deaf community, you can always reach out to me. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Dara, for sharing your story and for it is still unbelievable to me that people who are a part of our community of this citizenry still face so many issues on the most basic tasks. And I understand that Anna has to leave, but because we just had this conversation with Dara, I did want to ask you one question, just very short. We're going to try to wrap this up in the next 5 to 7 minutes. Unilever, like you said, partnered with Now PDP, and obviously from Zara's story, disability sensitization is a major factor that affects the retention of people with disabilities. Could you give us a very short overview on what you thought, what you could see you had accomplished through this program and what you hope to see in the future, maybe in the near future?
Right. So, Raja, yes, you clearly pointed out, and I think, yes, as we can, identify that this is very important, not only at an organization level, but also granularly at the LM level, and also, within the team that a person with disability is operating. So as a first step, we have collaborated with Now PDP, who, is responsible to onboard the people that we, or the trainees that we bring in. On top of that, we have other efforts. So for example, we have a sign language training going on, and everybody, you know, down from our top 50 to middle management and lower management is supposed to attend that. It's not mandatory. You can raise your hand for that, but a lot of people, it's very encouraging to see that there's great response rate on that. Beyond that, you know, we try and include, so for example, we had a marketing retreat, and one of our marketing people, you know, one of our marketing team members happened to be a person on wheelchair, and we made sure that the entire program was planned in such a manner that this person, you know, is Sameen is her name, so I'll call her out, was part of it and participated in every activity, indoor and outdoor. So not only are we taking kind of more formal, you know, interventions in the form of a training, in the form of a sensitization session, in the form of a one-to-one connect, we also try and make sure that in all engagement activities that do go on, they're, you know, they're planned in a manner that they are inclusive, and anything that we do is, you know, sensitized from that lens.
Thank you so much, Anna. Thank you for joining us today. I noticed that we are over time, but I would love to thank you again for your insights and learnings. And we hope that other corporations can take a similar journey to Unilever Pakistan in disability inclusion. Jamal Saab, I would also like to hold you just for 2 more minutes. Could you let us know, and since this was mentioned earlier by Muniba, how can we ensure that disability inclusion isn't just a tick in the box?
Okay, look, one, I think what's important and critical is that there has to be commitment from the top. And when I say top, you know, even coming from the board. And so, you know, I think that's something that, you know, we've been blessed with as an institution, that the board has been very committed to supporting PWDs, and it's been there for some years. And that's why, you know, we've been, you know, pushing and driving that agenda through the organization. So we really don't do it because you know, it's the right thing to do. There's a business case to it as well. You know, as Hassan Saab said, you know, when he started, he said 15%, and I think that's a global number. You know, we also had you know, other data points out there saying, you know, 80% of the PWDs are in developing countries. So the numbers, if you look at the numbers that there are in Pakistan, the official numbers are obviously, you know, grossly underreported. But, you know, even if you look at the last survey number that there was in 2019, that's slightly north of 10%. Even if you look at that number, that's you know, close to 24 million individuals in Pakistan. So something that we do, for example, is, you know, we have an HBL Connect, which is a branchless banking proposition where you can operate your account through, you know, 40,000 different dukans in Pakistan or off your app. So you know, team members from Connect go to some of these institutions who support PWDs and tell them about our products, tell them about how they can operate an account, tell them about why it's important to have accounts and save. And the intent is really to, you know, is about financial inclusion. And that is, you know, I think at the core of, you know, what we're trying to do and what State Bank is also trying to do is make sure we include them. So, you know, so there's that aspect. The other aspect is really, you know, trying to change thought processes and mindsets. That's really what we're trying to do in the organization. So, for example, we developed an e-learning module for all our staff. More than, you know, close to 13,000 of our staff have already taken it, and it's about changing the myths that people have about PWDs, and it's really about getting them to understand, you know, what is the right thing to do and what is the wrong thing to do when you're you know, dealing with, talking to, or serving PWD customers. So it's, you know, the changing thought process, and that doesn't happen overnight. It's a long-term approach. So it doesn't really make sense. If you're doing it for ticking the box, you know, you're not going to get very far. But if you really want to embed it into your DNA as an institution and organization, you have to go through the steps. It's, there's no shortcut to this, and you have to stay on track and on path. And with that strong commitment coming from the top, you have to keep pushing that agenda. Extremely critical.
Thank you so much, Mr. Jamal. And I think this is something that is a lesson for everyone to take home with them too. Ticking the box is just not going to get us that far. But instead of hearing from me, I would like to invite our head of research at the SER, Mazza Sheikha, to kind of wrap up our discussion and deliver her closing remarks, her thoughts, and reiterate the survey on disability inclusion that we're doing for Pakistan's corporate sector. So Nazish, I will leave that on to you. And from my side, I wanted to thank everyone for being here. Radaba, unfortunately, had to drop out. We are way over time. I underestimated how incredibly engaging this conversation is. And I just want to say I'm very happy that Unilever Pakistan and Habib Bank Limited are our SDG leaders on our SDG leadership program. So we have a lot more to explore with you. And this is going to be available. The best practices from these companies are going to be available to the rest of the business community. Nazish, over to you.
All right. Thank you, Raja, for the really good sum up. I think I'm just going to be very quick. Today we've been presented, Radaba has presented the business case for disability inclusion and the market size that exists as customers. We've also heard about the people with persons with disabilities perspective as well. And, we've also seen that obviously the discussion when there is diversity is different, and that it really does help the business case. I'm not going to go further in, I think Jamal and Anna really summed up the conversation today, and obviously talked about whether, how to move beyond just a checklist or just a tick in the box, and how it's a learning experience for all of us. It's a learning journey. And if we all think of it as a learning journey, I think that's the only way we can move forward. I'd just like to remind you all, as Raja did, that I have shared the link to this for the survey in the chat box, and we'll also be emailing you the link with the recording of the webinar. And with that, when we will be sharing the results of the survey in an event in September. So I look forward to taking the conversation forward there. And this is our journey has just started. There's a lot to learn from here. I'd like to thank Mr. Jamal Nasir, Anna, I think she's just dropped off, Azima, Zehra, Muniba, and Raja, of course, and of course our interpreters, Minerva and Riaz, for doing such a good job today, and Mr. Ahsan Malik for the great opening to our, obviously, discussion today, and and we look forward to a good journey forward. Thank you and bye.
Thank you, everyone. Have a great evening.
Thank you.